so many legends in this building today.
Welcome. You're listening to Legendary I Lived It, the podcast. This is Kevin Jonas Sr. Today's guest is Mike Curb. Mike, who founded Curb Records and launched the careers of many artists that are household names, will share with us stories of his life and his career. So thankful to have you with us. Everyone welcome Mike Curb. Well, for those of you that are listening today, I just want to tell you you are in for an incredible treat. When we think through legends in the music business, there are a few names that rise to the very top. The gentleman that we're going to be speaking with today is someone that I have benefited from throughout my life, listening to the music that he wrote, that he produced, the company that he built, the artist and the careers and the incredible songs. Today we have with us Mike Curb of Curb Records, one of the great legends out there and still making great music today. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, Mike, when I think about my life and the music that has impacted me personally, you are really at the top of the list. But I would love to know, how did you get started in this crazy business that we're both in?
Well, I'll tell you, in 1964, it's kind of interesting going all the way back because I started school in the Compton Watts area of California, and living in a racially integrated area, Hispanic, African American, white, and I loved it. Then, of course, our family moved out to the San Fernando Valley area of California. But I went through the public schools all the way, and I actually left college when I was going to Cal State in 1964. I left college because I wrote a song called "You Meet the Nicest People on a Honda," and I was able to get the agency for Honda to buy it from me for $3,000, and I thought I was rich. So I dropped out of school and I started the company, and then I ran out of money. I lost my apartment. In fact, my sister and I had to live in the janitor section of the building where we had our office on the Sunset Strip in Hollywood. And it was really ironic because we had our first hit in 1965 with a song called Apache by the Arrows, which was my band that I had in high school. It was just I played piano and keyboards, and we had a guitarist and a bass player and a drummer and so forth. And we hit the Billboard chart with our first single in early 1965. And an African-American friend of mine, named Eddie Ray, who had become a friend, I had met him when he was at Imperial Records. He had moved to Capitol, and he had become vice president of Capitol for their tower distribution division, and he agreed to distribute my record label. And then we had our first chart record in 1965, and I was in the studio working on the first song that I ever charted, which was a song called Life. And I left the studio. I left the studio because I had to pick up the members of my band, and three of my band members were African American. They lived in Watts. I drove down to Watts. I believe it was August 11th of 1965, and I picked up the members of the group, and we drove to USC down the Harbor Freeway, where we did a show the night of August 11th. And while we were performing, we heard explosions, and we went up to the roof of the fraternity house, and Watts was starting to burn. And then the governor of the state was Jerry Brown's father, Pat Brown, and he was in Greece on vacation. If you can believe that. And the lieutenant governor, Glenn Anderson, was in charge, and he was afraid, to call out the guard or do anything that would create further unrest. But right or wrong, he ended up presiding over a situation where Watts burned, and it was so tragic because Watts had made so much progress, and it was such a tragedy to see it burn. It was a heartbreaker for me, and then the next day I went to the studio to start recording down. It was down Midtown, like in the Melrose area, and as I was leaving the studio, I had someone tap my window pointing a gun. My car lurched backwards. My car was demolished.
Oh, terrible.
Fortunately, I didn't get shot, but I lived through this, and I was so proud of what California was able to do after that, because we really did come back. We came back a long way. The great irony is 15 years later, I actually ran for lieutenant governor, and the reason I was elected was because our then governor, Jerry Brown, was running for president, and California focused on the office of lieutenant governor, and nobody from the music business had ever really run for anything political, and I certainly didn't have any political background at all. My grandmother would have been DACA. She was Hispanic. She had come over from Mexico, and very, very beautiful person, very smart, put herself through college, but she would have been considered DACA today. And these people, what a tragedy! They would have sent her back. If they had sent my grandmother back, the way they're threatening these beautiful DACA kids, if they had sent her back, I wouldn't even exist, because I was her only grandson. So it's really fascinating for me to realize that here I was then elected as lieutenant governor and really serving almost a year as governor, because Jerry Brown was running for president that year, 1980. And here I was, maybe for a moment, able to carry out what my grandmother wanted me to do. She was a strong Democrat, so she had a agenda for me that was rather interesting, but I sure tried to do that for several years, and we're still trying now. Today, I think I mentioned to you, our foundation is opening just this past week. We've made a gift to the Hispanic Center, which is the lead gift. They're going to name it for my grandmother. They're going to call it the Eloisa Salazar Center. It's right here in the heart of Nashville. It'll open in October, and we made the lead gift, and it'll be named after my grandmother, who inspired our foundation. And then on Juneteenth, which was last Friday, we released an album for the 150th anniversary of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And we know the history. I've been on the board of Fisk for many years, and they even gave me an honorary degree a few years ago, along with Nancy Pelosi. But we had a really, I don't know how to say it, but last week we made a major league gift to the African American Museum in Nashville, to Fisk University. We really want to be part of the solution now, because Black lives really do matter.
That's beautiful.
To my wife and me, but we want to be part of the solution financially as well. And I don't know if my words mean as much as they used to when I was in government, but our whole company and our lives are really committed to seeing this resolved in a very, very positive way.
You guys are so amazing, and I totally agree with you. It is necessary, and it's the time, and the fact that the man who runs the largest independent record company, with all the successes and all of the hits, the success in NASCAR and politically, you still care about the right things.
Well, it's all intertwined. I mean, in our life, I mean, we're so blessed and fortunate to be able to just work in the music industry. And for me to be able to do it for 56 years, I started as a teenager, and to be able to do it through all these years, and somehow along the way to spend a few years, in government, both in Washington, D.C. and in California, to have been able just to do that, and and I tell you, I always say to my wife, I always regret what I didn't do. You know, people will say, why did you do this or that? But I always regret most the things that we could have done. I wish we had anticipated the homeless issue more. Our foundation fed 96% of the people in Nashville who are homeless during this past 6-week period, you know, through Second Harvest Food Bank, through the Rescue Mission, through Room at the End, Safe Haven. And we're working on trying to do something in Memphis. We were working late last night to try to come up with something with their Union Rescue Mission as well, through our Rock and Soul Museum there. We're trying every way to try to do those things. I know I had a chance to meet with former President Jimmy Carter last year, and we were able to work with him as one of the co-chairs for the you know, for his charities. But Habitat for Humanity was the major thing that he wanted us to participate in. We got involved with the Carter Center, but Habitat for Humanity was the first one we got to work with President Carter on, and it was really fascinating because he said the same thing to me that President Reagan said, which was, he said, Mike, we think you'll be able to accomplish more outside of government than inside. And certainly Jimmy Carter did and has done that. He has accomplished far more since he's been president than even all that he accomplished when he was president. And I think, and maybe that's the only thing Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan ever agreed on, but I've listened to that and listened to what my grandmother wanted and tried to create a company and a foundation that one that could stay open. We have stayed open during this pandemic. We couldn't have our people at the office, but they all stayed home, and now most of them are back in the office, but they worked really hard. Our foundation stayed open. A lot of the bigger foundations couldn't stay open because people didn't have the cell phones, but everybody had my cell phone, and so we stayed open, and I think we're proud of what we've been accomplishing, but we can always do more. And you know, I'll let you go on to your next question.
Well, I hope we can do more. And you know, my wife and I are honorary chairman of Convoy of Hope, and they also have been very busy. They're, I think, at 20 million meals they've supplied, and we brought them to our tiny town in Belmont, and the line was 4 miles long. And when we ran out of food, we brought in a large truck. There were still 2 miles of people just outside of Charlotte that needed food and supplies, and it was encouraging to help. It was discouraging to see the need.
Well, it's just shocking. You know, we just have so many people out of work, and it's really complicated. You know, in Tennessee, there have been over 600,000 people just during this period out of work, and it's really hit our inner city community the hardest, because many of the people in the inner city have essential jobs and driving buses, doing all kinds of essential things that, and now fortunately most of our African American employees at our company are safe at home like we are, because they live in areas where they can be safe. It's very hard in our inner city right now to be safe at home, and this crisis has really hit all of our people, regardless of their race. It's hit them very hard, and you know, safe at home for you and me. We are able to be safe at home with our wives, but it's not so easy for our inner city people who. And not only have they lost their jobs, in most cases they've lost their health care as well, because their health care may have been tied to their jobs. So this is a real serious issue. I'm glad we're opening. I'm glad we're being careful. And wow, I hope we. You know, my grandmother went through the TB, the tuberculosis pandemic, right after she put herself through college, and she lost 3 of her sisters. And her father and so when we talk about how strong she was, I mean, and then, you know, we have parents and grandparents who've made it through the Great Depression, and we see how strong they are.
That's right.
And I hope this makes us stronger, and I hope our country comes together. I was devastated yesterday to hear that the administration is refiling against the beautiful DACA kids. In fact, I just could not believe that after everybody was so excited about the Supreme Court decision there, and so excited about the Supreme Court decision last week giving gay people their equal rights in the workplace. Two of the great landmark decisions for our gay employees and for our Hispanic employees came down last week, and I'm a little shocked, or very shocked, that our administration is somehow questioning or going against these decisions, because we're a nation of laws, not a nation of men. And when we have a Supreme Court decision that rules in favor of gay marriage, or rules in favor of gay equality, or rules in favor of our DACA immigrants, I mean, this has to be final. And so I have a real problem with anybody who is fighting the Supreme Court decision there, because I think it's final. I know there's work for Congress to do, but and in this day and age where we see racism everywhere, when we see what's happening to our gay community, we see what's happening to the DACA kids and our immigrants, I think it makes us understand how these things happened in the past. How could our country have had slaves? How could our country have had racist? How could our country have been racist toward Jewish people and African American people? How could that have happened? Well, I think we see it today when we see the way people in our country attack our immigrants, or attack our DACA young people, or the way the gays are attacked. That's the same kind of racism that maybe our parents and grandparents had to fight, and it's just ridiculous. And so I hope we come through this as a much better country, and I hope we heal, because it's time for that. And we're going to go through 5 tough months getting through this election, but I sure hope we can find some middle here and heal this country.
Amen to that. Totally agree. I have a question for you. Was your family, specifically your grandmother, was she able to see the joy that you brought to the world through your music and through your life?
Well, she played a big role in it. She after her husband, my grandfather, died, she moved back to the border and lived right there at the border, Laredo, Texas, right on the border of Laredo.
Yeah, I know it well.
And so she moved back there. She played an enormous role in her belief. Both my grandmother and mother thought every song I wrote was great, but sometimes in my early records, I think I only sold 3 records: one to my sister, one to my grandmother, and one to my mother. But she obviously believed. I think what really made her happy was when my music group, the Mike Curb Congregation, when we became regulars on the Glenn Campbell television show on the CBS network back in the late 60s, I think that brought a lot of joy to her, because she and her friends could watch us perform, and so that brought a lot of joy, and it did bring her joy when she always wanted me to either be in the Peace Corps or be in government, and I think it did bring her joy. In 1974, I was speaking at a group called Junior Achievement. It's a organization that helps inner city kids learn about business, learn the things that they may not be able to learn in school, and very motivational organization. But they asked me in 1974 to speak, and I wasn't even a registered voter then. I mean, I didn't even, I just didn't want to identify with a political party. I was focused on my business totally. But they asked me to speak, and the next speaker was Ronald Reagan, who at the time was the governor of California, but he was coming to the end of his term, and the person who was going to introduce him didn't show up, so they asked me to speak and introduce him. And I was already giving a short speech about what I had done to start my business, but they sent me a card saying, "Would you please introduce the governor?" And at the time it was Ronald Reagan. So I'd never met him, but I introduced him. And he was a very popular figure in the state. He had been an actor. Actually, he had been a Democrat. But at that time he was a Republican. But I introduced him, and then he spoke. And then afterwards, he asked me to join him at his table, and we probably spent 30 minutes. And there were 2 or 3 other people there. But he said to me, "Would you ever consider getting involved or letting your artists get involved?" He told me about the fact that he was going to run for president. And of course, I obviously said, sure. But then I looked him in the eye and said, I'm not even a voter. I've never been a young Republican, young Democrat in college. In fact, I dropped out of college. I said, there's all kinds of young Democrat and young Republican programs. But I mean, all I was thinking of is writing songs and producing records. I wasn't thinking about these, those kind of things when I was in high school and college. And so it was a interesting thing, but he did call and asked me to get involved. And it's really interesting. He was a very transformative figure. He actually in 1986 put through the Simpson-Mazzoli bill, which he signed and championed, which I got to work on, which gave amnesty to 3 million people, including friends of mine, and including people who are still employees at our company. He gave them amnesty. He was a very good person. I mean, we can always look back and say, well, we could have disagreed on this issue or that. I mean, there are always generational issues where we can find a way to disagree with every president who's ever been there. But with Ronald Reagan, he had a good heart. And I see a lot of my friends who are Democrats, independents, and Republicans who look back at Reagan and say, those might be the good old days. They look back at Jimmy Carter and say, that's the good old days. Because
that's right.
These were really good people. These were, I mean, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, they were really good people. They certainly had their disagreements too, but they were good people, and they carried on after their presidency. So I just would love to see a day when we can bring this country together. And anyway, so my grandmother got to see that, and I actually got to see her and tell her that I was involved helping Ronald Reagan back in 1974. The only thing is, she was a Democrat, and so she said, "Oh, I'm so happy it's Ronald Reagan because he's a Democrat." And I always felt like I needed to tell her, no, he had made that proclamation that he was a Democrat, and he didn't leave the party left him. He made that statement, and of course then he was elected as a Republican. He was elected as a Republican. I just didn't have the strength to tell my grandfather. I didn't have the strength to tell my grandmother that when she said, "Oh, good, he's a Democrat," I didn't have the strength to tell her that he wasn't. I said I'm going to save it for the next visit, and I'm sad to say that right after that visit in 1974, she died. So she died thinking I was supporting a Democrat. So, and in answer to your question, she got to see my music group, the Mike Curb Congregation, on the Glenn Campbell Show every week. And
that must have been amazing.
But she got to tell me what priorities should be for our foundation. And this past week, we signed an agreement to create the Eloisa Salazar Center in Nashville, Tennessee, for our Hispanic community. So It took a long time, but we may have at least been able to memorialize her dreams.
That's so good. My grandmother worked in a cotton mill in North Carolina, and part of the reason I moved back, although I travel until this pandemic a lot, was to open a restaurant in our downtown area. And she worked hard from the time she was a child, but open a restaurant dedicated to her in her name. And so I understand that desire, those strong, hardworking, good women that really do make a difference. And Mike, I wanted to just thank you. When you invited me over to your home and we took a walk through, there were so many things in your home that captured my attention. One, your lovely wife and her sweet spirit. There was no question. She is a special, special lady. And then you took me through, and what I was really struck by was your humility. We were talking about my sons for a second, and you said, "Oh, I had a group that did Brother Harmony. Maybe you've heard of them, the Bellamy Brothers." And I said, "Yeah, I've heard of them, along with like all of planet Earth." And then we moved over.
Or maybe the Osmond Brothers,
or the Osmond Brothers, and exactly. Then you pulled out the Osmonds, and I was, and of course my wife loved Donnie, and I loved Marie when we were young. So pretty special walk through history for me. But
well, how about the Smallbone Brothers, who go by the name For King and Country, who have who just had #1 records and massive platinum albums this year.
They are so good, and you've done such a good job with them.
You know something? We should have gotten together, because between us, we would have had all the successful brothers in the world.
Had I known you, I would have signed with you.
Well, it's not too late. It's not too late. No, but seriously, isn't it amazing? Between us, we have been able to not only, to be a big part of their lives as well. I mean, back in the days of the Osmond Brothers, I was their producer. I mean, and I'm sure we had 100 chart records, either with the Osmonds or Osmond Brothers or Donnie Osmond, Marie Osmond, Donnie and Marie together, Jimmy Osmond. I mean, we had so many hits, and I was struck by the Osmonds because they were such a tight family, and they held together, and that's what we see sometimes. They don't, and we're seeing the way the Jonas Brothers have come back together, showing what a powerful the powerful family upbringing and the fact that you left them or you allowed them, is a better way, allowed them to come together their own way and to spread their own wings and come back even bigger than they were. In the same, I guess you could say with the Smallbone Brothers, who are For King and Country, what they've done as a family. They came over here, and they and from Australia the same year that I moved to Nashville, 1992, and they came over here and they had nothing. They lost their home. They were homeless, and
Wow.
neighbors had to bring them food, and I think that's what made them strong. Just like you mentioned, your grandmother. Or my grandmother, we've heard the president sometimes talk about how his father only gave him $1 million to start his company. Well, my father, when I dropped out of college, he didn't even give me money to help me with my apartment. I lost my apartment. He wanted me to go back to college, and he was right. I mean, he was right. I should have. I wish I had, but I didn't. But I don't hold it against my father. But when, it's one thing for some, but you and I didn't get $1 million from our father, did we?
Oh, no. No, I'm still looking for my father. Never met him.
Well, my father and mother weren't in a position to give me money, and my dad was an FBI agent. my mother always wanted to be a teacher. She didn't quite get her credentials yet, but she was they were great parents. But they gave me more than money. They taught. We started school in the Compton Watts area. They always believed in bringing people together regardless of their race. My father always believed in the word de-escalation when he was an FBI agent, and I think that's what we need to see now. Do we really need to arrest people? Do we need 4 people to be arrested when someone like George Floyd had a possible counterfeit $20 bill? Do we really need 4 officers? We shouldn't even arrested him in the first place. And I would say the same thing in the case of Rashid in Atlanta this past couple of weeks. We didn't need to arrest him. He fell asleep in the car. The first officer almost looked like he got it right when he said, "You want to sleep it off and move over to the corner." The second officer took it too far. The man didn't need to be arrested in the first place. And so I think the big issue is to bring, obviously we need to bring all of our communities together with the police, but the word de-escalation was something my father always talked about. The idea that success for him was never even having to pull his gun. And the idea that maybe maybe in the right setting, someone could have bought a cup of coffee for Rashid and let him sleep it off, or lock the car and let him walk to see his sister. Do we really need to invoke confrontation? My first big issue today would be, if we're going to bring the police and our various communities together, is to think of how we can de-escalate the relationship. Even if someone's doing something wrong, do they always need to be arrested? Do we need to arrest people for victimless crimes? Or would we be and put them in a position where they have a police record, and then it's harder for them to get a job? De-escalation is the word that I'm so proud that my father always believed in, and I'd like to see. I always believed in that when I was in government, and I believe in it now. Let's think about what we need to not arrest people for, and see if we can bring people together rather than arresting people and adding to the confrontation. And again, I understand there are incidents, and we're seeing them now, where the police have to be there, and everybody understands that. And I love the way some of these mothers are coming forward in the inner city and saying, "Hey, don't burn my business." The mothers are reaching out, and I'll tell you one thing: the mothers and the grandmothers in the inner city, they're the powerhouses, and you and I both experienced that with our
Oh, yes, absolutely. Very strong. Oh, that's wonderful. I think I hope that the more seasoned voices from our industry, like yourself, will continue to use common sense and raise their voice for what's needed in the world today.
Yes, and I'll tell you a funny incident. When I was running for office, there was a very popular senator named John Briggs in California, very conservative, and he had a bill that to ban gay school teachers, and he qualified it for the ballot. He qualified it for the ballot the same year I was running for lieutenant governor of California, which was the largest state at the time, or most popular state, I guess. So he had this, and it was called an initiative, qualified for the ballot. Most people were either supporting it or saying nothing about it, and it looked like it was going to pass. And of course, I knew Reagan at the time as well. But without thinking, I said, well, wait a minute. I could never support something that would ban gay school teachers. I'm in the music industry. The gay employees the gay executives and gay artists are a huge part of our industry. I said, we cannot have this initiative. Well, Ronald Reagan, several people involved with Reagan called me and said, Mike, I thought you were helping Reagan. You can't come out and make statements like that. You might put the governor, they called him Governor Reagan at the time, in an awkward position. I said, well, I'm running for lieutenant governor. If Governor Reagan disagrees, he can tell me. Well, sure enough, his secretary called and set up a meeting. I went to the meeting. Halfway through the meeting, Ronald Reagan said, Mike, this looks like a bad law. I think I'm going to join you and oppose it. Well, you should have seen the people, the Reagan people. All of a sudden, other people from both the Democratic and Republican Party started changing their mind, and we defeated the initiative. Imagine, how could you have an initiative that would ban gay school teachers, right? So Ronald Reagan was much more than me. I mean, I was credited with getting Reagan involved, but it was Ronald Reagan's voice was much more powerful than mine at the time. But what was so interesting is when they made the movie Milk,
yes,
won the Academy Award. Sean Penn won the Academy Award, and of course, you know, here he was, and he played Harvey Milk, right? He played,
right.
Well, Harvey Milk was a friend of mine. In fact, when I was elected, I was supported by Ronald Reagan and Harvey Milk. Now, try to put that coalition together.
Yeah, that says a lot about you.
Well, I can tell you what it does say. I was the last person who ever ran as a Republican that was ever elected lieutenant governor or president of the Senate in California. The last. No one else has ever been elected to the post of either lieutenant governor or president of the Senate. And we used to do commercials in Spanish. My sister used to proudly talk about our Mexican grandmother. It was just such a different time. But now you look in California, no Republican can get elected to anything in California now, because the party has come out against the Hispanics, and the African Americans don't identify with the party, and gay people don't identify. It's a very, very difficult situation. But it was so interesting. If you see the movie Milk, at the end of the movie, Sean Penn, who won the Academy Award for his part, Sean Penn says it was the Republicans who came out, and he pictures and he shows a picture of Ronald Reagan and me going to a rally to announce that we're fighting the bill that would have banned the school teachers. So and it's in the movie, and it was really funny.
Amazing.
Well, it's really funny because my oldest daughter is the kind of person who she never says, "Hey, Dad, I love you. Love the fact that you did this or that." We're real close, but she's not the kind of person that just showers praise or anything. But she saw the movie with her friends, and she said, "Dad, I was so proud of you when I saw that you came out for Harvey Milk against fighting the initiative that would have banned the gay school teachers." I thought, you know something? If I made my daughter proud, then maybe I did something good.
Well, I totally get it. You know, my sons, Nick and Joe, started on Broadway. And he told the story of coming out of the Broadway show, and two men, part of the cast, kissed on their way out. And he asked me what that was, and I said, everybody deserves to feel loved and to be loved. And it was just my heart. It wasn't anything political. It wasn't anything about faith. It was about the love of mankind. And he's an advocate today, but he brought that up when he was giving a speech for the gay community. And it just kind of blessed my heart to know that, our kids, we're dad. Sometimes they can roll their eyes. Sometimes we're old and conservative and our thinking is off. But every once in a while, there are those moments. And I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that movie just so I can see your picture, because that's a piece of history and a very important piece of history for the gay community.
Well, I'm really proud of it. I was really proud of it, and also the fact that the Reagan Museum is proud of it as well in Washington D.C. There, because Ronald, they're opening the institute for him in Washington D.C. Right across from the White House, and he wants to reach Democrats, Independents, and Republicans with the institute, and and they're in the motion picture building. So it's just amazing, as we said earlier. Given what's going on right now, people look back at men like President Jimmy Carter and President Ronald Reagan and say, these men were good men. We may have had generational differences, but wow, they were good people, and they cared about Hispanics, they cared about African Americans. They didn't pit people against one another, and that's the big thing today. Is we've got to make sure that we heal through this election. The country is so divided. Wow.
Yeah, it's terrible. Terrible.
And people need to love whomever they love. They need to love the person they want to love. We can't stop people from just because they're two men or two women or transgender, whatever. People have to be able to love the person they want to love.
That's right.
That's a beautiful time that we're in now, and the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of that, and they've also ruled in favor of non-discrimination against gays, and I think we should rejoice it, just like we should be rejoicing the fact that the Supreme Court handed a victory to the beautiful DACA young people, and I think we need to rejoice those things and start and let that be the start of healing our country.
Absolutely. And it is sobering to think the Supreme Court has to rule concerning discrimination in the workplace against gays in 2020. That is a sobering thought, that something that is so fundamental, the human rights of the people we love, it's astounding.
But you know what's even more scary is even after these issues have made it all the way through the courts up to the Supreme Court, and even after the majority of the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of gay marriage and in favor of non-discrimination in the workplace, even after that, there are still elected officials who want to try to fight it. And it is so sad. And those people should be so ashamed of themselves, because they don't realize it maybe, but they're doing the same things that we have seen in generations past, where people discriminated against African Americans, against Hispanics, against Jewish people. We've been through that, and we still see it. It still goes on. But my goodness sakes, I mean, how can law-abiding office holders question something after the United States Supreme Court has ruled? It's so sad, and I feel so sorry for our gay friends and our Hispanic DACA friends, that they're being put through this kind of, I won't use the kind of four-letter word I'd like to use on the podcast, but it's put through a lot of this stuff.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm making I don't know if anybody cares anymore about my opinion, but I'm making my voice well heard on that, and even to some people who are in office who I have supported in the past. And I've actually spoken with both, or had substantial email exchanges with, I've spoken to one of our senators in Tennessee in person, or not in person, on the phone, and I've had a real strong exchange with our other U.S. senator about the subject. And by the way, I will say this, our senator in Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, made a very, very powerful statement about the dignity of human beings and the need to respect the Supreme Court decision. And I would just point out that he's been a 3-term senator, a 2-term governor. He was Secretary of Education. He was president of UT. I mean, he's the longest running office holder, and he made some very positive statements. So I know at least one Republican in America has said something positive,
good.
and I, and I haven't really, and I'm hopeful that others that I've supported in the past, Democrats and Republicans, I'm hoping that they will say the right things, and many are right now.
Well, thank you for taking a lead on that. Two of the artists that I love dearly were African American black artists that you worked with and were critical in their career. One was, of course, Lou Rawls, and the other, Sammy Davis Jr.
And you know what's funny about those two artists? Both my group, the Mike Curb congregation, was still performing back then, and the Lou Rawls' first major hit for us, which was "Natural Man," my group sang with him, and then on "Candyman" by Sammy Davis Jr., it was literally a duet. It was my group had recorded. My group had just had a pretty big hit called "Burning Bridges" which was the title song from Clint Eastwood's
That's
movie.
the Clint Eastwood movie.
Kelly,
yeah.
Well, Kelly's Heroes. I had co-written and in my group, I had written it, and my group performed it in the movie, and we had just had a hit, and so we thought we were big shots, and so we decided to record "Candyman," which was the theme from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and I produced it. I thought, wow, this is going to be a big hit. Well, it didn't hit, and so here I had just had a big hit with Kelly's Heroes and Burning Bridges, and then the next record wasn't hitting, and I felt so bad about it because the producers had believed in us for the movie and everything, and we had just signed Sammy Davis. He had been on Motown of all places, which was a great company, but they hadn't been able to connect with Sammy. So I said, Sammy, while we're trying to figure out what you're going to do on the first session, would you consider just singing, maybe taking a shot at this song? And he said, Mike, this is a white bread song. He wrote about it in his book. He wrote, I forget I think the title of his book was Yes, I Can. And he wrote in it, he said, it sounded like a white bread song. And I said, yes, you're right. But remember, Frank Sinatra, who he loved, I said, Sinatra did High Hopes. I mean, you could have fun with this. And I said, I promise you the next thing we do will be really significant. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, my friend Al Bell was struggling with what to do with Isaac Hayes. When I say struggling, was looking for an opportunity for a film. He wasn't struggling; he was doing great with Isaac Hayes. But and I was asked to do the music for Shaft, and I thought, I'm really not the guy to write Shaft, because Shaft was like a black James Bond movie. But it was right. That was also right after Kelly's Heroes. So I asked Al what he thought, and he said, what about Isaac Hayes? So we did the duet. We did the record of Isaac Hayes. Al did it. I mean, Al and I guess, I don't know if we were executive producers or whatever, but Isaac Hayes produced the record. But we were trying to get the Academy Award for the song, but it didn't have a lot of music. Shaft, if you remember, it just didn't have a lot of music. So right. I said to Sammy, I said, Sammy, would you be Sammy Davis Jr., why don't you create a lyric? I called Al Bell and Isaac Hayes. They said fine. So Sammy kind of created, it was almost like a rap. He talked about John. He just rapped over it. It wasn't exactly like, you wouldn't have confused it with Jay-Z or anything, but it was for that period of time. It meant something. Well, that was coming along. So I told Sammy about that. I said, but Sammy, in the meantime, before we do the Shaft thing, would you just put your voice over Candyman, just so we can get that out there and have something working and get you back on radio, So he said, okay, I'll do it, but I'm only going to make one take. Well, he made one take, and
wow.
It wasn't perfect. So I told him I had made a mistake. Would you do one more take? And he did, but he never sang the chorus. So I dialed my group in on the chorus. So you remember, I don't know if you remember the record, but it was a monster number one.
Oh, I remember. I was a young kid, and that was my theme song.
Well, Sammy would start it out like, who can take tomorrow? He did that, but when it got to the chorus, I dialed my group, and the Candyman makes everything he bakes.
Satisfying and delicious.
Yeah, we could have been the Curb Jonas.
That's right. We need to do at least one song together at some point.
But I dialed my group in there, and they sang the chorus. So we released it as a duet between Sammy Davis Jr. and the Mike Curb congregation, and the darn record went all the way up to #1. And then we did Shaft, and so when Sammy recorded Shaft, we were trying to figure out how do we win the Academy Award. There had never been a Black Academy Award winner, and we wanted Isaac Hayes to win that award. So we decided, with the permission of Al Bell and the people at Stax, we decided to send to all the members of the Motion Picture Academy the Sammy Davis version, because Sammy, #1, he was African American, and #2, he was also Jewish. He had married Mae Britt, and he had converted to Judaism.
That's right.
And he also really identified with the community of the disability community, because he wore a patch over his eye. So he communicated with those who were disabled. He communicated with the Jewish community. He communicated with the African American community.
He was welcomed in the Frank Sinatra Rat Pack world. He was a part of that whole thing.
Oh, and he was always very good on issues like gay rights and everything. So anyway, we sent Sammy's record to the Academy. Anyway, the song won the Academy Award. And so it was Shaft, and it was just so exciting. And it was so funny. I was just on the phone this past weekend with Al Bell. He's older than I am now, and he is still doing great things. He just got the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award a couple of years ago. He just got an honorary doctorate from the University of Arkansas. But we were on the phone talking about Memphis homeless and getting his, Al Bell is such a major figure in Memphis. In fact, he would fit this profile that you're working on now. He is just.
Oh, I would love to have him.
Oh, he's a real good friend of mine. He was the president of Motown when Barry moved to California. He made Al Bell president of Motown. Al was president of Stax.
Crazy.
He signed Isaac Hayes, and he was the pivotal figure. I mean, I was just lucky to be involved in it. I just knew that I wasn't the right guy to write it, and I kind of had learned my lesson from the Candyman situation, and I was really interested in just getting the best song, so the fact that we could do it. But what was really exciting is after Shaft won the Academy Award, Al Bell decided to do Watts Stacks, which was to bring the Watts Compton community together there at the Coliseum, and he allowed me to be part of it. And that was very healing for me, having started school in the Watts Stacks area and having been in Watts the night of the riots, and just having been through all that from a music standpoint and a government standpoint. That was a beautiful thing. He's such a pivotal figure. And
some of the people that
Al Bell also wrote and produced the Staple Singers. He wrote a couple of their hits,
Wow.
and produced them with Mavis Staples and another family.
Of
They're
course.
a beautiful family. But all Otis Redding. I mean, the artists that he inspired. And I think in the Memphis community, I don't think there's anyone bigger than Al Bell. He's in the Memphis Hall of Fame. I was there for his induction. But now he's in Arkansas helping them build a music industry. Just an amazing transitional leader. And he's probably in his later 70s now, and very, very strong. So.
I would love to have the conversation, and part of what I hope to do here is catalog the passions, the history of these legends. You in that category, but from different aspects of the music business. From agents to touring folks to songwriters. And I'm really, truly excited about it. Thank you for listening. That was Mike Curb on Legendary I Lived at the Podcast. The good news for you is this is just part one of a two-part series with Mike Curb. He had so many stories to tell, so much wisdom, so many life experiences. We rolled it into another episode that we'll post next week. Please remember to follow us, subscribe, rate us, and please share us with your friends and let everyone know about our podcast. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.